Hey everybody, thanks for tuning into Crash Command Games, Cast a Commotion. It has been a very long time since I put out a podcast, simply due to the fact that I have been injured. Very hard for me to get up and down these stairs. But this time I want to talk about what lost me my ProQuest season. What edge did I leave on the table? Why did I keep edging on the table? It's more of a topic on how to identify when you're in control, when your opponent's in control, and really who's going to beat the other one off. I'm just getting all my pent up childishness out right now. So go ahead and check this out. We're going to be talking about how to identify what position in the game you're in, where to look for those signs, and when to take advantage of those signs being shown to you. All that and more this time on Cast a Commotion. Welcome back to Crash Command Games. Thank you for the patience in the giant gap between videos. But I really jacked up my knee at an EDM show. Got pushed down some stairs because someone misread a situation. And my PCL, LCL, MCL, and meniscus all tore. Surgery pending in the next 4 days. Hence, the podcast and video. I needed to get something out before the surgery occurred because it is going to be so much harder for me to get up and down those goddamn stairs. It's going to be so much harder for me to get up and down those goddamn stairs after the surgery. Obviously, we'll return to more normalized content at a more regular interval as I heal up. But in the meantime, in much the same way that my leg learned who the beatdown was from those goddamn stairs, today we're going to be talking about Who is the Beatdown? A very ancient article that if you've watched any of my previous podcasts, listened to them, or watched some of my previous videos, you may have picked up on my friend always putting his hand on my shoulder. You forgot who the beatdown was. And sure enough, anytime he says that, I just think back to my game, and I know for a fact he's right. Who is the Beatdown is an article from, my childhood. Many people's childhood, really, who play trading card games in a serious capacity nowadays. Pre-2000, in 1999, Mike Flores, a Pro Tour player, identified one of the key fundamentals of trading card games, and that is learning your role. You need to know your role, all right? That's just something you have to be able to do in order to succeed on a competitive level in any card game. Does not matter which one it is. Magic, One Piece, Flesh and Blood, whatever the hell you're playing. You need to know your role in that game. His article entitled Who is the Beatdown goes over a very, at the time, inspiring and innovative way to look at the game. It's how to identify based on deck which way the game should flow. It's trying to identify who needs to be in the actionable position, who needs to be in the relaxed control position. That was a very good way to look at it back in the day because not a lot of meta was happening. It was very red and I guess black and white, very black and white on who's going to be the control, who's going to be the aggro, etc. Fast forward to today. There has been I believe there was another article called Who's the Beatdown 2, but it was a Japanese player who wrote that one, and I don't even know how to get a hold of it. I didn't really read Japanese at the time, so I just kind of ignored it. And I swear to God, the blog is written in Japanese or something. I don't know. I ignored it. I didn't look at it. I really didn't get too concerned with it. But I'm quite sure what it did is what I'm going to be doing here today. And that's expanding on the idea of who is the beatdown and how to really engage that idea with Flesh and Blood. Because Flesh and Blood is unique from Magic the Gathering. And who is the beatdown is not always completely apparent, right? We're going to go ahead and pull this up just so I can go over my notes real quick. So I've already gone over the fact that we're going over who's the beatdown for Flesh and Blood. Who's trying to pull the Flesh and Blood from who? With all that said, we need to find out what the beatdown is. And I kind of alluded to that already with saying that Who is the beatdown is whoever's in the actionable position and who's in the defensive position. Who is the beatdown refers to, do you need to be doing something right now? Or can you kind of wait for a better opportunity? It doesn't seem that way in the early days of Magic the Gathering, where if you were mono red and you were going into, I think at the time it was rock, green, black, you knew who the beatdown was. It's mono red all day. It didn't even matter what the position was. After sideboard, that could change, but we don't have that luxury in Flesh and Blood. Hence, the need to update this idea for Flesh and Blood and how to extract the nuances of these philosophies. Okay, so now that we know what the beatdown is, it is the actionable position, who is the actionable player, and how to identify if that's you. Okay. Now that we know what that is, the only real thing we have to talk about is variance in Flesh and Blood, because obviously there can be mirror matches that are not true mirror matches. How do you identify in a mirror match where you probably won't be playing the exact same copy of the deck? How do you identify who's the beatdown in that situation? What does going first and second imply for these matchups? Is there a way for you to scout or do anything to kind of solidify where you are in that game? Yes. Answer to these are all yes, and we'll be discussing those further here. I'm just going down the keynotes and the rundown real quick. Once you've identified if you're the beatdown or you're the control, that's step one in winning any game. Okay? You need to identify if my actionable position puts me in an advantageous position to push damage, or if you've identified that you're the control, you now know how you need to act until you see something change. Okay? In Who's the Beatdown originally, it's just, do I need to be trying to kill, all that? Very simplistic. Again, back in the times, it was very innovative and a very cool way to look at the game. But with Flesh and Blood, it's not that simple. It's more of a, every turn, every decision, you need to be checking, did I just become the beatdown? We'll discuss on those moments also later. That kind of covers the sections of knowing the tools, knowing the signs that you're the beatdown, or that something has changed, energy has shifted, they're on the back foot, you're on the front foot, etc. At the very basic level of Who's the Beatdown, you could look at what deck produces more damage and what has the potential for more damage. That gives you a very crude idea of who's going to be the beatdown. But these may also be misleading because cards like in Gravy Bones or Prism, these allies represent so much more damage than you could possibly know without being in that exact turn. In that exact moment, you might not, you wouldn't be able to tell if those cards are really that valuable in this specific matchup until you know that matchup. All of that to say, we are going to cover the basics of Who's the Beatdown. We're going to go over some examples of specifically what to look for and how to find these signposts. But you really just need to understand that to apply these concepts, this is an advanced concept. So for your newer players, this is good to know and keep in the back of your mind while you're playing, but it is an advanced concept and it will take time and games and reps for you to understand completely. Because in order to implement this idea of who is the beatdown, you need to know the meta, you need to know the iterations of each deck, and you just need to know the cards. Okay? So I wanted to start with like very basic examples, right? The Welcome to Wraith heroes were a really good starting point for Flesh and Blood, and I love to talk about them. So we could start with like the examples of Dorinthia and Rhinar. If you know who those are in Flesh and Blood, one's a warrior who likes to press the advantage of hitting multiple times, and Rhinar likes to strip away your defenses and just hit you really hard. In this matchup, who is the beatdown? Let's take a look at raw damage output. If we're talking single turn raw damage output, we'll look at very crude lines. Dorinthia presents 3. On a maximal hand, can sometimes produce as much as 1 blue with 3 other cards on an arsenal. Very likely only threatening 3, 6, 9, 12. Very honest damage. Okay. 12, maybe 15 damage, right? Per turn. If they have a full hand, like very, very perfect scenario. That does not take into account the weapon, what state the game is, and if the Dawnblade has any +1 counters on it. So what we've just done is a quick analysis of what's the average damage Dorinthia can do. We kind of have an idea that she does like to be a beatdown deck, because I believe anything around 14 to 15 damage plus a turn represents good aggro. And then we look at the incremental advantage to if she starts to build up counters, the on the Dawnblade specifically, or if you have an item, an aura, something that's building up power over the long term, you start to become the beatdown more and more as that thing begins to press the advantage. Let's take a look at Rhinar. Rhinar, like I said, likes to try to strip away your defenses and hit you once or twice really, really hard. So we take a look at like an average Rhinar turn of the time, right? We could have a Blood Rush Bellows, Savage Feast for 8, and then maybe another 6 for another 8 for like an average of 16 damage. Much like Dorinthia, around the same wheelhouse, give or take a few damage depending on the Blood Rush turn or the non-Blood Rush turn. Seeing anywhere from 8 to 16 damage a turn off of 2 to 3 cards. They don't specifically have all of the reactions or anything most of the time in Brute. So in Brute, we see an honest 8 to 16 variance. On face value, the Warrior looks like it is the beatdown. Let's explore further. Who has more defensive cards? The Brute and the Warrior each have very good sets of armor, each capable of playing a lot of defense reactions, though the Brute typically might play a little bit more with like reckless swings and things like that. Maybe unlikely, but the Bonehead Barrier, unlikely, but possible. Furthermore, and further evidence shows that even though Rhinar's entire ability is to strip away your defenses and hit you really hard, Dorinthia seems to be more of the aggressor. In this scenario, where we look at general gameplay and general game knowledge of Rhinar and Dorinthia, yes, the Brute can press damage, but Dorinthia can present more consistent, threatening damage. So we have to ask ourselves, who's the beatdown? Based on what we've just analyzed, I would believe Dorinthia to be the beatdown 90% of the time, just because it's more consistent, more frequent, more pressing advantage that builds over time. And that would lead me to believe that Dorinthia is the beatdown in this scenario, where she's most of the time actionable. Can this change? Yes. When does it change for Rhinar, and how would you identify the change? Say you've been in this game, and the Dorinthia, and you're the Rhinar, and the Dorinthia has been presenting to you 8 to 9 damage, maybe sometimes 12, every turn. But this time, only presents a naked Dawnblade for 4. And you do the honest math in your head with what they have left in their hand after your last attack, and you only think they're going to be presenting 7 to 10. Can you give up 1 card and drop some armor and drop a Blood Rush on your next turn and absolutely hammer them and put them on some life loss? Yes. Is that going to be a consistent thing? Yet to be seen. So as the Rhinar player, and one of my local players is really goddamn smart about this. Don't know if I never like mentioning names, but he's the Rhinar player of this area. Anybody knows Mindful Games in Tacoma, you will know this Rhinar player, okay? Absolutely is a master of identifying when they need to pivot on you. And immediately will Blood Rush, roll the scabs, Blood Rush, swing big into 10, claw, and just absolutely pummel you. And because of the amount of damage that they can put out, upwards of 24 to 27 frequently, it can feel like a lot of pressure for the Dorinthia player, and you as the Rhinar player may then have taken the initiative and made yourself the beatdown player, putting them on the back foot. That in that example is Dorinthia and Rhinar, of how Dorinthia may start as the beatdown player and may frequently be the beatdown player, but that also told you kind of how to set up a turn for Rhinar and become the beatdown and take the advantage for yourself. Sometimes you just need to gauge about what your opponent's doing, block, be defensive, understand tempo, and then once you've set up the right turn and you see there a sign of weakness in them, open up on them. And that becomes the ebb and flow of flesh and blood that we talk about when we're trying to identify who the beatdown is. It's not so much about what deck did you present, it's about the moments in each turn, and are you identifying what cards they're pitching? Are you seeing what cards they're pitching? Do you have a relative idea of when their power spike is going to happen if you hit second cycle? Have you hit a power spike and they have a weak turn? All things I've just talked about are variants that you need to keep your eye on. That will help you identify the beatdown. We can continue the example through the Welcome to Wraith heroes with Rhinar and Katsu. Much like the Warrior, Katsu, almost my first hero, Dorinthia ended up being my first hero, but Katsu likes to press wide chains. 2 combos that have greater effects and greater on hits. Rhinar, as we just discussed, likes to strip away the defenses. A lot of the times this game can come down to Katsu. Can they press the advantage with lots of on hits and develop a crazy advantage and press too much damage? On an average turn, we're looking at pitch a blue, Kadachi, surging strike, pitching another blue or something like that, or maybe a head jab, or I don't know, some 0-for-4 soul bead strike, something like that. Ancestral Empowerment over to tap. So what is that? 1, 1, 5, 9, maybe 12 to 13, maybe 14 damage a turn consistently, but punching through their defenses by providing too many small attacks to block all the damage. Seems good. Going into Rhinar, someone who doesn't like to attack so much, and knowing that they have less defensive options. But as a smart Rhinar player, what you can do is block the attacks that have the on hits that matter, take some of the damage knowing that you have a whole host of defensive equipment, and just be very patient and return a little bit of damage at a time. So we're trying to identify who is the beatdown in this matchup. The Ninja, who's going to go wide and present a couple of on hits, or the Brute, who's going to slowly grind down their opponent and get incremental value every turn until they see their pivot turn. Harder question to answer because the on hits are the variable here. You're basically looking for how many on hits are being threatened. If more on hits are being threatened by the Ninja or the class that likes to go wide, they are the beatdown. If the Brute is given a little bit too much time, then they develop too much of a pitch stack, they develop too much resource generation, they have too much time to set up their turn with their arsenal and their hand sculpting, and then they become the beatdown. So, by those two phrases alone, we know the Ninja is the beatdown. The Ninja needs to beat the ever-living hell out of the Brute before the Brute has enough time to reach their power pieces and set up a huge turn. Can the Ninja do anything about these things? Yes, of course. There's cards like Command and Conquer, all these other things that maybe Dishonor, whatever. It's largely inconsequential what the Brute does to the Ninja, because the Ninja's just trying to race you down as fast as possible anyway. There's many scenarios in which the Ninja is just likely to be the beatdown, except in like a mirror. We'll talk about that later. That's a further advanced concept. We're just trying to go over the basics right now. So again, Rhinar is put into the position of a mid-range deck versus an aggro deck. It needs to be patient and wait for its opportunity to completely open the taps, and then later seize the initiative. We further look into Katsu versus Bravo. Who is the beatdown in Katsu versus Bravo? Well, we just went over that Katsu likes to go super wide and threaten a lot of on-hits. But what does Bravo do? Bravo Showstopper likes to hit huge dominated attacks with debilitating on-hits. How does this look? Maybe Bravo starts the game. Maybe Katsu starts the game. I believe this is a good time to talk about another form of variance. Who goes first? In a game in which Bravo goes first, there is a chance that he could dominate a Spinal Crush. Right? That's 7 resources, and 3 blue would do that. What does Spinal Crush do for newer players? It makes it so you can't get and you lose Go Again, which inherently cripples ninjas. So if a Bravo ends up going first, sets up a huge hit, Starstruck, Spinal Crush, any of these things, well, that's just crippling to the ninja. And then the ninja becomes a defensive player at that point, because they can't either go as wide as they need to present as much damage, or they end up just losing all momentum after being hit with something like that. So in the Katsu versus Bravo matchup, you may have immediately assumed that the Guardian might be the defensive deck. But because we examined who went first, that may change. Right? Now let's look at Katsu going first. Katsu knows that the Guardian has tons of defensive options. So what's better? Open the taps on the first turn knowing your opponent's just going to draw up again? Or do you try to smartly cut in a little bit of leaked damage and set up a bigger turn for later? The obvious answer here being sometimes you need to set up the big combo to guarantee that you leak through more damage over time. From that perspective of Katsu going first, it sounds like Katsu might be the beatdown. But in reality, what we just said was they need to be patient and look for their opening. Many times, this is the huge identifying factor is people get stuck in their heads, oh, I'm a guardian, I'm a defensive player. Sometimes not. Depends on the on-hits, depends on what you're trying to do, and depends on the turn. Something you need to examine every single time. So in this exact scenario where Bravo goes first, Bravo could very well be the beatdown. If he knows that he is not going to have enough defensive options late game to outlive the Kodachi lock, the stab for one attack late game that usually ended up happening back then, where it would be swing an Othos, they block with 2 cards, they pitch 1 card, stab twice when you're at like 1 life. You have to give up 2 cards each time, and it becomes this awful cycle. Okay? So knowing that the ninja will eventually just stun lock you and put you into an infinite cycle of block or die, the Guardian looks like the favored answer for who is the beatdown. And I would very much so agree in that scenario. Many people made the huge mistake back in the day, even me a few times when I was playing Oldhim, of just trying to grind out the ninja. Does not work, man. Ninjas are so deceptive. And it's clearly the name would imply so, but even more so in gameplay, if you're not used to looking for the dangers of that Kodachi lock, you could go down in a worse kind of way. Katsu vs. Bravo was kind of a wrench there. Kind of threw some newer players off, I'm sure of it. Many players may not have even experienced that meta or those heroes at all. And then we'll just continue with Bravo and Dorinthia. Bravo, we just talked about, is a guardian who has many defensive options, but also has debilitating on-hits that could push the initiative in their favor. Dorinthia, we discovered initially, was largely the beatdown because of their present consistent damage and threatened to build momentum over time to press the advantage. Which of these is the beatdown in this matchup? We'll say Dorinthia goes first. Dorinthia knows that there's a host of defensive options, staunch responses, sink belows, all kinds of things that are very typically in Guardian decks. So is it smart to just open the taps and try to go for it? Sometimes. But very typically, what I found myself doing on turn 1 is not using any of my action pumps, but presenting a naked Dawnblade on turn 1, leaving them to answer, do they want to dedicate normal cards? And then all the while, I'm going to briefly note on meta. Not the game meta, but physical meta, the life around you. Sounds more hardcore than it is. A lot of the times, I'm a casino dealer. I'm a floor supervisor. I'm a pit, okay, in a casino. So I'm very keyed in on a lot of body language. Many gamblers will be as well. I have a poker player that plays with us at our local shop too, who's very keyed on these things. When I present my naked Dawnblade on turn 1, I would often sit there and stare my opponent down while moving my Dawnblades forward. If they even flicked their eye, I assumed immediately they had a defense reaction. Okay? You need to be looking for these kind of things in game because, like, as much as we want to say it's just the game, it's not. It's a game with imperfect information for you, so I need to get as much as I can. I need to find as much information as I can. So once I see there's a defensive reaction, as a Dorinthia, I go, oh, I'm not the beatdown yet. They have set up for this. So I need to bide my time and wait. And I'll arsenal a card for later and see if I can block through some of this damage, or maybe they have a subpar turn, or maybe they don't threaten a crush effect. And I just need to wait until I have an opening to completely run them through. Now, I have gotten to the point where I've fatigued a Bravo with Dorinthia. And it is very possible. You just have to find that right moment. This specific game was against my partner, and I knew that all of the defensive reactions were in the graveyard at this point of the game. So when I presented a Glistening Steel Blade and I went in to put counters on my Dawnblade, and they blocked with a certain amount of things, I knew there was no reactions coming, and I just opened on them. And then I got a bunch of counters on it. And then eventually they were using 3 cards a turn to try to block it. And I would be tapping through 1 damage in just the most brutal way. Because I knew their reactions were gone. Eventually they full hand blocked, but by that point we were at fatigue state. So, something to note. In this matchup where Dorinthia goes first, and you can divine your information correctly, you need to identify that you're not going to be the beatdown right off the bat. You may become the beatdown later, as we discussed earlier, when the tides shift, when they lose momentum, or you've tracked their pitch and you know what's in their deck, or you can check their graveyard. With these advanced concepts in mind, you can identify when you need to become the beatdown. Roles reversed. Bravo goes first. Well, you know they're going to be coming at you as hard as they can on your next turn. If you have a more defensive suite, maybe it's just swing the hammer and start your fatigue package and save some of those defense reactions and block smartly. Knowing the flowchart of Dorinthia is much like in Street Fighter, knowing the flowchart of Ryu. You will get through it as long as you stick to the plan and keep your mind calm and you just keep your wits about you. Basically is all that comes down to. From that discussion, it sounds more like Dorinthia is still the beatdown, but it is more of a mid versus mid matchup where it's just they're playing footsies with each other, trying to find out who. I do believe Bravo becomes the beatdown more often than not in that matchup. And not because of a weakness in Dorinthia. It's just they find a really good crush effect they can dominate, and then they take the role of, I'm now going to just beat the living shit out of you. Right? I've experienced that matchup far too much in my lifetime. So those are some of the basic examples of who is the beatdown. In that little segment, we went over what is a beatdown? How do you identify who is the beatdown? When is the beatdown change? And how can I take being the beatdown from my opponent? Those little pivot moments. And then we also explored, does it matter if you go first? The answer is yes, right? And that will carry on further as we get to the advanced examples. So you need to, every turn, kind of do like a checkup. Put your finger on that pulse, not in your ass, and go, is this the turn where I become the beatdown? When, Lord, when is going to be my time? Well, ask every turn and eventually you'll know. So let's move on to some advanced examples that are a bit weird, that may not be so apparent. The first one is one of my favorite matchups that I had of the ProQuest season, Kano versus Jarl. May seem really obvious right off the bat that Kano should be the beatdown. They combo hard, they do a lot of rapid arcane damage. But how did this match play out? I presented 4 arcane barrier, one including Heart of Ice. I presented a 1, 2, 3, 4. I think I presented Sledge of Anvilheim. Took a lot of my defense reactions out of the deck, put a lot of my big attacks in the deck, and a lot of ways to gain dominate. Okay, they're only at 30 life. As the Jarl player, I looked at the match and said, okay, if I have this 4 AB and I can present 6 a turn, I'm taking 2 cards out of their hand until I find a good turn to present some serious damage. Now, I knew that the longer the match went on, the more likely I was to lose. Because the longer the match went on, the more time they had to pitch stack. That answered the goddamn question right off the bat. I am the beatdown. I need to win before they can get to their combo pieces. Okay? Yes, I'm a guardian. But I'm a guardian with really nasty damage and tricks that I was able to do. How did this game play out? First turn, I just kind of swung a sledge at them and stashed a Channel Lake Frigid. They tried to hit me with some arcane damage. I pitched one of my blue cards, prevented some of it. I still took a little bit. On their turn, they played a potion and passed. And I got panicky because once they start playing potions, they're setting up really well. I think they tried to hit me for like 3 arcane damage. I let it happen. Because on my next turn, it's activate the Heart of Ice. So he now had to make the decision, do I try to do anything right now or do I make everything more expensive? He chose not to do anything. Play Channel Lake Frigid. Now everything's way more expensive, okay? And I've only pitched the 1 ice blue. And then, let's see here, that's 1, 1, 1, 2. And then it was Sledge, and it was Save and Oakenold in my arsenal. Okay. So now his defensive reactions are way worse because he can't just play them. And it turns out he had one of them in his hand. So he had to give up a few other cards. He had already arsenaled the card, which I assumed was an Aether Wildfire or something. And I think it was a Blazing Aether, if I remember right, by the end of the game. No, it wasn't. It was Lessons in Lava. It was what gets Blazing Aether. Okay. And then from there, he just looks at a few cards, tries to opt, and then puts cards on the bottom of his library, pitching them to Kano, right? He's not looking to do anything fancy. He's just looking to pitch stack and do his thing. Exactly as I thought he would. My turn, I don't have to activate Heart of Ice this time because I already have the Channel Lake Frigid, and I just Oakenold. And I will just tell you to save the time, turn after turn, it ended up being like, Oakenold, Glacial Footsteps, give Mangle Dominate. And I kept trying to take the Storm Striders with Mangles, giving them Dominate, right? I put a -1 armor counter on that thing pretty fast using another card. I forget what it's called right now. I think it's not Frozen to Death. It's I forget what it was, but I put a -1 armor counter on that. So from then on, I'm starting to threaten the Storm Striders the whole time. I am the beatdown as Jarl. And eventually, I think it was like turn 6, I had killed him because too many times did I get 8 to 10 attack dominates out, right? Pretty quick example, but just a quick rundown of who's the beatdown and why. Jarl and Kano in that matchup, I was looking at myself saying, I can't let the match grind on as long as I normally would as a Ice Earth Guardian, because he will kill me. Next up is Verdant's Florian. Another advanced kind of matchup on who's the beatdown. You look at Verdant's wanting to do the huge setup for the huge amount of arcane damage. Florian also likes to do the huge setup. Okay? Which one of these should become the beatdown? This needs to be answered. And the reason I brought this example up is because this needs to be answered by who's going first. If Verdant is going first, she's going to take the time to set up and maybe poke a little bit of arcane damage through. Okay? If Florian goes first, they're going to use their entire turn to just set up Rune Chants and not give any interaction time to you. Whoever goes first typically is going to be the control variant of the deck. That is typically because they're going to use their turn to try to set up and deny you interaction while furthering their own plan. At that point, if you're going second, you probably become the beatdown because you can't let them get that huge of an incremental advantage on you since you're both setup decks. In that answer, we learn if I'm Florian and I'm going second, because what you do is you present your hero, flip that coin, find out who's going first or second. As soon as you're learning you're going second, you need to sideboard in some of your more offensive options and try to press the attack on them so they can't just sit back and combo you while you try to get your combo going. There are reasons you wouldn't do this. You just need to sit there, and whether you're going first or second in that matchup, you need to learn. If they're going first, they're very likely not going to be very aggressive. They're going to likely take the time to set up and try to spell your doom later on with their big turn, their big combo. And if they're going to get the first turn on that, they're going to get there before you most of the time because this game has less variance and there's more ability to sculpt your hands in the way that you want to by pitch stacking. So you cannot rely on that. Florian, you probably become the beatdown if you're going second. Next up, we look at Prism versus Bravo. Who's the beatdown in this matchup? This is an interesting one that I thought I would bring up because as Prism, you have a lot of attacks that are very vulnerable to Bravo. But as Bravo, you can't let them develop board state. So who becomes the beatdown in this very interesting dynamic? And a lot of the time, the beatdown is Prism. I'm just going to say it right now. Why? If Prism lets the game go on too long and too many of their attacks get popped and too long goes by and the Bravo is able to use things like Zealous Conscription, Arouse the Ancients, and their Hammer to clear your board, you're going to run out of time and they're going to fatigue you or beat you to death. Okay. And now that there's more aura destruction coming around in these coming sets, even worse. So weirdly enough, Prism becomes the beatdown in this matchup where you have to now figure out the puzzle and navigate. How do I get my Phantasm attacks past all of these 8 and 9 attacks? How do I set up my board in a way that they cannot clear it in time? And how do I do it in such a smart way that I can then build an oppressive presence on the board? How do I build an oppressive pressure against them while maintaining these puzzle pieces. A lot of the time you might think Prism wouldn't be the beatdown because she likes to sit back a bit, bide her time, and wait for that one turn to blow up. Same is kind of true, but she's on a bigger timer because Bravo presents such large attacks and she's already at such lesser health that she can't just sit around and wait. And if she tries to sit around and wait and has mediocre turns, then Bravo just pumps through them, passes all these Phantasm poppers, and clears the board if they have Zealous Conscriptions, E-Strikes, all this kind of stuff to also clear the board. And then also, like I said, new aura destruction is coming. So, interesting to think about that even though Prism would normally like to be defensive, bide her time, and then create the board state, which is still what she has to do against Bravo, she's under pressure to do that against Bravo. Syndra as well. And then coming up with Prism, I wanted to talk about two heroes with a similar goal. Who is the beatdown? Gravy Bones or Prism? They both like to set up board states. They both like to set up allies. They both like to mix in larger attacks with these things. Who's the beatdown in this? The largest difference here, is basically that Gravy Bones doesn't get as many good defensive options as Prism does. No Soul Shield, still has access to Sync and things like that, but you don't want too much of that in your deck because otherwise you're kind of muddying the waters, so to speak, and you're not staying on goal with Gravy Bones' requirements, because Gravy Bones actually is a machine that once turned on needs to keep going and churning, or it will just grind to a halt and it will feel really bad. So even though they both have the same game plan of set up the board state, the graveyard, set up all of these allies and big damage turns, we now know that because Gravy Bones has less option to defend and less option to control the matchup, Gravy Bones now is the beatdown. Because otherwise, Prism will present far too much damage against Gravy Bones over the long term of the game. She has bigger attacks. Gravy doesn't usually pack a lot of poppers. That's kind of it. So in a matchup where you're in a very similar style of gameplay, you can still identify who the beatdown is by just asking yourself, do I have as many defensive options? Is the answer no? I'm probably the beatdown. Do I have the ability to deal with their offensive capabilities over the long term? No? I'm probably the beatdown. So those are some more advanced examples of how to identify where you are in your game, who you are in the game, and to, once again, know your role. Last but not least, I needed to talk about true mirror matches. Syndra versus Syndra. The hardest question is, who's the beatdown? Now, in your brain, you might just think, that's a coin flip. Whoever goes first probably gets the disadvantage because the other person just blocks it all out, sets up a huge turn, filters their hand, looks for the bigger attacks, and starts to press the advantage on you. Is that true? Well, a lot of the time, whoever goes second in the aggro match will end up taking that match. They get the initiative. They get to filter their hand. They get to look for the better turn. You're going to be left on the third turn, on technically the second turn, because turn 0, turn 1, turn 2. On the second turn that you might have less options available to you, or you might have just taken a bunch of damage in order to start a race. Who knows, right? That seems like a huge coin flip. But in the game of Flesh and Blood, it's a best of one. And you really need to use all of your time and resources available to you to understand this. If you are in the Syndra mirror and you find out you're going second, do you overload your deck with Sink Below, Calming Breezes, Shelter from the Storms? The answer is probably no. The answer is probably you load your deck's inventory or from your inventory with more offensive options that block well. And then you shave your deck down to be as efficient as possible. If you know you're going first and you're going to need to be on the defensive and have a better defensive response so that you can return equal damage to the first turn your opponent has, then you might set up your deck with a few more Shelter from the Storms or something else that blocks multiple little points of damage, right? In that sense, because it's a best of one, you need to use your brain. And with all we've gone over here today, you need to go over, I'm going second in this true aggro mirror. But in my inventory, I have a few tools that could help slow my opponent down or speed my game up. Which am I going to do? Or if you're Syndra and you're going first and you know you're going to get your ass kicked on their first turn, should I put in my defensive options? If you don't do that, you may have misidentified who the beatdown was. Because in a true aggro mirror, whoever gets the first hand advantage is going to win. And that's typically second in the aggro mirror. So if the player goes second, they typically have the advantage. To end, I just wanted to make a quick note that realistically, determining who the beatdown is going to show you who is more certain to win with the game in its current state. Okay? If you identify a better likelihood of succeeding and winning this game with the current game state, that person is the control player. Okay? With the current game state the way it is, that person becomes the control. That person becomes they just need to wait around for this to happen. Okay? And that means you become the beatdown. You need to bring action to the game. You need to show that you don't care about what they're doing. You don't care about their defensive control. You can break through that. And then eventually they will have to respond or lose. Okay? They need to identify that, I need to do this now or I lose, right? You need to make them actionable. So there are many ways to determine this. All of them I've given you in this through the variance, game state, board state, how to identify these features of an aggro deck, how to identify the features of a control deck. Sorry, I just keep getting distracted. There's a lot of noise outside, and I try not to talk when there's a lot of people driving by. We're getting to the early hours of the morning, rush hour starting. Sorry about those interruptions and those small little pauses. But that's really what it is. It's you determining the state of the game and seeing who has the highest likelihood of succeeding should this continue. If it's not you, you're the beatdown. You need to drive the force. You need to change the game state so it's you. Okay? And if that is just putting the screws to your opponent and making sure they feel pressure, and that works, you win, right? You became the beatdown and you won the game. Now, does that mean force being the beatdown? No. You need to use every tool that I just gave you in all of those checkpoints every game to say, now I'm the beatdown and I can present my damage. Now I'm the beatdown and they no longer have control of me. There are going to be some cases in this kind of a game where you just have a bad matchup. We have so many heroes and so many talents now that there can be a rock, paper, scissors element and it can feel bad. But if you identify every turn who's the beatdown, you'll have a greater chance of coming out of that underdog match with a win. That's all there is to it. Deckheads, thanks so much for listening. I hope to see you guys again soon. I wanted to put out a kind of more important piece that talked more than just current meta, but really how to develop as a player and what to make yourself a better player. I know this was a bit more advanced, so for some of the newer players that have made some comments and messaged me, I am sorry. This is not the content piece you were probably looking for, but come back. Revisit this. Listen to it anyway, right? This piece of information could have changed my whole Pro Quest season around if I just pulled my head out of my ass. Guys, thanks so much for doing everything you can. I've gotten your messages. It's not a lot of people, but it's a few people, and it means a lot to me. Thanks so much for chipping into this one, and it's 0.